The idea behind today is really just to highlight a number of principles that we can all use to improve the design of any visual material that we use for teaching and learning. And when I'm talking about that, I'll touch on two of the primary tools that we would use in this context, namely PowerPoint or the Office 365 suite and Canvas. Make a start by talking about some design principles that hopefully will be of use. And I suppose a lot of a lot of these will be familiar to you in terms of the everyday design of anything, and you're probably implementing a lot of these things already. But it's good to put a kind of a name to the principle and just understand them further before we can start to implement those then in the environments that we use for teaching and learning. So the design principles are kind of hovering over there in the animation: alignment, repetition, contrast, hierarchy, and balance or symmetry. And balance can also, I suppose, introduce tension to design. And when we're looking at all of these, we'll be talking about the various elements that comprise design, including white space and fonts and color and things like that. So design principles are essentially guidelines that we can use to shape the design of our visuals and just to improve the aesthetics. And again, a lot of this stuff will make sense from everyday design of screen-based content. There are four of those design principles that I've already mentioned there. I'm going to start with visual hierarchy, and we're going to look at some practical ways as well then that we can implement these in our everyday. So visual hierarchy, it speaks to the order of importance of our content on screen. So at a basic level, if you're looking at something like a Word document, a PowerPoint slide deck, or even in the rich content editor within Canvas, um, the most obvious place where that would manifest itself is in your header settings. So you have heading one, heading two, heading three, heading four. And those levels of headings all have an importance, not only in terms of the hierarchy or the importance of information on screen. They showed the various sizes of the fonts according to their visual hierarchy or importance, but they also have an important link in with how screen readers read any content that we've authored for these platforms. Um, Visual hierarchy can also just help you give certain prominence to various elements. So it just doesn't have to do with headings. It can do with the relative size of objects on screen. For example, if you're laying out images versus text. And in visual hierarchy as well, you can be looking at how bold versus other contrasty elements work. So this is an example of visual hierarchy in action. You will read this last because it's the smallest bit at the top. And in the center, you can see the larger text, and you can see the hierarchy of the information down here. So in terms of visual hierarchy, there are five essential basic ingredients. One is size, so that's an obvious one. So the size has to do with the relative size of objects on screen. So you can see it with the two boxes there, a large and a small element. And here is I suppose this concept in practice. So this is better because you have the hierarchy of your text and you have this sort of useful layout. And on the right hand side, you can't really distinguish between the hierarchy of the information. So it's a lot easier to parse for the end user this whole concept of visual hierarchy. Just 2 seconds. Okay. Right. So The next, this is an example of hierarchy in action, actually in a Canvas module. So you can see the header one or the is reserved by Canvas. So your module information, header two being the next significant header, and then your relative size of the elements here. So these are just headers, header one, heading two, heading three. You have bold text to give importance to certain elements. And the use of visuals as well to do that. Weight is another thing. So I just mentioned bold or light in element weight. So you can see here the same in action. This is grand in the last one, but this is much better. And these are only subtle things you can do. But even if you're writing an email, or if you're composing some sort of a visual, all of this stuff plays a part in how the user's eyes will be navigated through the content from the very top down through the screen. I suppose the big thing is a lot of us have limited attention spans when we're looking at screen-based content as well. So all of this stuff helps to parse the content better. Color is obviously another big element. So we have a sort of a two-tone color theme for the slides here, which keep it nice and straightforward. But using high contrasting colors can help in relative importance of your content as well. So text and icons and so on. So here's an example of that in action. So this is color use of the various sections of this layout here. And this is a kind of a muted one where you don't have that sort of level of importance indicated on screen. So color is a really powerful way of providing importance or conveying importance to certain elements on screen. Positioning then is another one. So playing around with the prominence and I suppose the not so prominent positioning. So here's an example of a slide with a slide heading. Now this doesn't have to be just a slide. It can be any kind of screen-based content. So when we're talking about design here, we can be talking about PowerPoint slides. We can be talking about documents. We can be talking about social media posts. We can be talking about slides as well. So I suppose the positioning of your elements is quite important. Again, this links in, and all of these things kind of work hand in hand in terms of how hierarchy plays, how positioning plays, and how relative contrast and color plays a part in your end designs. All caps. So it's useful in your typography to use all caps for certain instances. So they're particularly useful for headings, and there's examples of that here as well. So you see this in a lot of the stuff that we design as a team coming out. You might have a short header like this where you have all caps, and that gives a kind of a prominence to that in a way that you wouldn't with standard case in these, and it works particularly well for interface designs and for slides and so forth. This is an example. It's probably an extreme example, but you can see here the play of color and the play of the all caps, and on the right hand side, your slide heading and just in a small bold against the content. So size, all caps, color, they all play a part in here, and obviously the relative positioning of elements as well. Remember that a good trick is to understand what the most important message is. And again, this can come back to anything that you're designing, be it if you're just literally talking about text or if you're talking about images and text, just think about what it is that needs to be highlighted as important elements on screen for the learner or for whomever you're delivering the content to. So just playing around with relative size, weight, and color and positioning, and the idea of all caps, they can all play a part in in information that can be easier to parse. Just a note here in that context is to use all caps only for shorter headings and labels. So it doesn't work for sentences, long sentences or paragraphs, but it is good to use all of these things that I've mentioned in combination with each other and in a calculated way. White space then is a really, really powerful one. And you know, if you're taking maybe a couple of things from this session today, white space would be something, a very easy thing to implement in any everyday design, and that can give your content a lot more breathing space. You can work with the screen real estate that you have available to you, and it's just a really powerful tool that you can use. So when I talk about white space, I'm just talking about the blank space around any screen elements. You can see on screen here we have, quite a lot of white space, but you can see even if you just use this exercise where you start from the very top left and you work your way down through the content, and just think about how a viewer's eye will be led through that content. This is particularly powerful in something like Canvas, where we want to just make sure that our learners can parse the content a little better. So rather than having big blocks of paragraphs and pages, or even in your assessment briefs, a use of white space can help just to break the content down. And from an instructional design point of view, we use a term called chunking and spacing. All of these things help again just to make the content easier to read. Um, and they all play a part as well, obviously, in the way that accessibility screen readers read the content as well. And I'll cover that in a minute again. And I suppose the other thing here is just the idea of less is better. So there's no limit to the amount of screens you can use or pages. It's often better to think about chunking the content up into separate pages and using more white space so that it's easier to parse. This is an example of this in practice. So on the left, we can see an example where all the content is very kind of cluttered looking and on top of each other. Now, it doesn't help that it's all lorem ipsum and just general text. But even if the text was different and you had maybe different images, it would still look like it needs some breathing space. So that whole concept of white space would just mean that you might separate this into two screens. So instead of having 1 to 6, you might have two different screens, or you could have two underneath each other that cover the same points, and you can still, from a learner's point of view, parse the information a lot easier. So you have a use of white space, and you have also a use of color on this right hand option here. So breathing space in your layouts can manifest itself in different ways. So you can use tables and padding and spacing to introduce these things in Canvas, for example, or if you're in something like PowerPoint, you can just do it visually within the slide layout. You can position items manually that way and distribute them equally. And here is another example of space. This is an example just from something that I delivered as a session recently. Again, just a bit of breathing space between your items. This was a table that had a lot of information to convey in one screen. So it's just a combination of your color, your spacing, and also the relative size of certain elements, and again, use of color in here. You'll notice that the top headings here are in all caps as well, which help in uppercase. And this is another one, just another example of a design of our 3 week, well, 4 week program, and just simply looking at highlighting certain elements, again, all caps for headers, and just that white space to give it breathing space. And if you look at it again from top left down through the content and to your call to action, which is at the bottom, this just has a kind of a flow to it that works well for the end viewer. Remember as well that white space can be used to separate sections between elements, and it just really helps to give that kind of a minimalist look as well to to your slides. So if you're taking maybe one little action today, maybe looking at your slides, try to break content up into maybe more logical chunks. Try to introduce some white space and look at those other kind of principles that we've just talked about in the last few minutes as well. And don't worry, I'll share the recording and the slide link after this as well. Repetition and consistency. So you'll notice in these slides, there are a few things that are consistent. You have your consistent use of color, of labeling, of the icon style, and even this maybe this idea of kind of bookmarking in each subsection. So when we talk about consistency, just aligning identical or useful elements throughout your design. So this could be an icon set that you use. So you could use icons to give prominence to particular parts of your learning content, whether it be slides or Canvas pages. The use of color is a consistency. So you can, for example, on this slide deck, we have almost like chapters for each of those principles, and the colors map over to the chapters. Your icons relate to the content that you're trying to convey. So repetition and consistency is literally setting down your theme for your design and repeating them then through your design to be consistent throughout. Um, and it just breeds familiarity between your viewers and your design as well. So once you set out a kind of a visual theme for your design, your users will be able to engage with that familiarity with either callouts, important notes, reflections, or activities, and all of those things clearly kind of marked out visually within your learning content, your teaching content. So how do we achieve it? There are a few maybe rules, especially if you're working with something like PowerPoint. Canvas doesn't really have this issue because in the content editor you can only have kind of a closed set of fonts available to you. But in something like Word or PowerPoint, it's important to just keep the font and numbers down to a minimum. So when I talk about fonts, we're talking about, Arial, Verdana. These are fonts that work well on screen, and there's lots of others, obviously. But one maybe common mistake is to use a number of different fonts through your design. Don't use more than three, but I would suggest two is a good place to start. So you could, for example, have a different font face or typeface for your headers as opposed to your body text. And again, when we're looking at fonts, then as well, you can think about uppercase for important elements like headers, bold, contrast, color, etc., etc. Layout is another thing. So do maintain a consistent design and format in your course or your slides. So this is just again, if you lay out a theme for yourself at the beginning, that you kind of stick to that throughout the design. And color again is a very useful way of just setting certain areas of prominence within your visuals. Now, you might recognize this. This is from the MTU brand guidelines. And these are the colors that are basically comprising our corporate identity, if you put it that way, for MTU. So you have the four primary colors of the MTU logo and sub branding in there. And so what's useful is you can use these colors in your designs, you can sample them, or you can take what are called the hex values, which are down here. So you can see print values, web values, office values, and you can use these values to map over the correct colors into your design. Or you can also, in something like PowerPoint, you can actually sample the colors and make sure that they map over as well. So if you do want to make sure that the content is consistent with the MTU guidelines, you can use these colors and you can create a kind of a color set for yourself within your design. And this can happen either in PowerPoint or it can happen within Canvas. So style is another thing. Don't mix, where possible, don't mix various graphical styles. or design elements in your design. So when I talk about this, it's mainly talking about taking graphics from various sources that don't have that visual consistency that you might have with a kind of a more consistent design. So this is an example of some of that in practice. So you have the font, the layout, the color, the style. They all vary, so they won't really give that kind of sense of consistency through your layout. This though does it uses the same font. We have a header font and we have a body font. It uses a consistent color palette. And again, if you want to sample the MTU colors, you can do that. Or if you want to use your own color set, you're free to do that as well. And you can basically just give that kind of level of repetition and consistency in your layout. Remember also that the elements in your design, they all work together. And so consider these things, the font, the layout, the color scheme, and the types of graphics. And I'll talk to you about graphics in a second that kind of build up that visual concision that you get in your course, in your resource, in your slides, or in a doc or something like that. Now, alignment is another thing. So, aligning your content can help with your visual concision as well. So, what is that meant by that is just being more conscious of where you place elements on screen. So, organize your design elements, create a visual connection, and that'll improve readability. So, here's an example of uh, something that's aligned all over the place on screen. Now, while something like this could work with a bit of changing around in terms of prominence and contrast, something like this works a lot better. And this obviously works a lot better when you look at things like tables in Canvas to be able to set out all of these objects on a page. Um, Another thing is just thinking about the padding or the relative spacing around your content within a page as well. And this is particularly important when you're looking at slide design. So you can see an example there in terms of padding and spacing. Remember that similar items aligned should be evenly distributed, so you can use the tools available to do that within Canvas or within PowerPoint, and it's easier then for your learner to kind of scan through the content. So I have eight kind of tips that you can use, tips and tricks that hopefully have some use in terms of just what we've talked about. So these relate to the various tools that we have available to us. So one is using PNG. So PNG is an image format. This works for most image types, I would say, particularly if you're looking at clean vector graphics or illustrations, or things that typically feature within a user interface. So the best all-round format is PNG because PNG can give you transparency. So transparency means you're able to layer your object on top of another one and retaining the background color and features of that other graphic. Also, you can use JPEG, I suppose, for photos. They don't have transparency, but I would say in the majority of cases, if you're looking at on-screen graphics, PNG is one to use. And PNG is something that you can use when you're downloading icon sets, and I'll talk about icon sets in a few minutes there as well. Keep text as text. So this basically just relates to not having text inside images. Now, I can understand where some of you would be using diagrams where you need to have text on images, and that is the one exception to this rule. But in general, avoid putting text inside images. And the main reason for that is that text isn't searchable once it's inside an image. So screen readers have a difficulty because they can't parse that information in a visual. So that's keep text as a text in your design. Alt text always. So that just basically means looking at your any of the images that you put on screen in Canvas or in PowerPoint, make sure that you add alternative tags. And if they are decorative images, so any image that doesn't need to be described by a screen reader can be constituted as a decorative image. So screen readers will skip over those and they'll just, focus on the primary content. So where you have anything like kind of background flourishes or icons that don't convey any particular meaning within the learning content, you can treat those as decorative images. And that's a setting within Canvas when you're adding an image. So that's basically alt text always. Consistent graphic style. So when I talk about consistent graphic style, it's looking at just the icon sets or the graphics that you use. Choose a particular type, and we can see within PowerPoint in a minute that you can pull from an awful lot of resources there in terms of the types of icons. You can pull in kind of cartoon style characters and illustrations, and you can do this through icon sets and icon libraries and open sources as well. But I suppose the idea here is when you're looking at consistent graphic style is that you stick to a particular style to avoid that visual clutter. I know there are some exceptions where you'll have diagrams or things that don't align in their particular style, but just try and use these principles or tips as guidelines to help you along the way. High contrast colors. So you can see that in the design of what I'm using today. We have high contrasting colors just to kind of give that sense of contrast between various elements. So ensure your text stands out against backgrounds. That's an important one when you're using or looking at accessibility checkers such as you do it or the built-in accessibility checker within Office 365. White space is everyone's friend. So that's what I meant a while ago of, just taking one thing. I think it's one of the most important things is white space and just not to cram your screen-based content with lots and lots of content because there's no shortage or there's no limit to the number of screens or pages that you can use within a layout. So a lot of white space can help to uh, keep clarity within your design and reduce cognitive load and very importantly improves readability. So again, going back to that idea of chunking and spacing and white space is definitely everyone's friend and I hope it'll be your friend after this as well. Chunking and signposting, breaking content into smaller sections, looking at banners, icons, and headings. This all helps the student scan and navigate through content. So again, that's just looking at how you break up your content on screen. You can use white space to do so, but you can also use different visual mechanisms like banners, and icons and headings. Um, Usability tips and PDFs. So PDFs are really good to use. Just maybe to think about a few things when you are using them. So Canvas works particularly well with PDFs, where you can basically upload a PDF and you can play that inline within Canvas rather than opening up any third-party applications. And it also works obviously when we're looking at um, the assessment side of things and grading, where in the speed grader, if we take in a PDF submission from a student, that we can annotate on top of that. A few just important tips when you're generating PDFs. You can, of course, export from Word or PowerPoint, but maybe just don't use kind of scanned content, or if you do, try and use an OCR tool within your PDF authoring software to keep the text selectable. So that just means that your content within the PDF can be indexed and used by an accessibility tool. And you can use accessibility checkers in any of these tools. So in Adobe Acrobat, in Office, or when you're looking at the Canvas side of things, you can use You Do It to do an accessibility check as well. So all in all, when I'm talking about usability as a and our accessibility as a common thread through this, there's just a few things you know that we can all keep in mind in terms of alt tags, in terms of not having text within images where possible, and obviously within PDFs here, we can just make sure that they are accessible to those screen readers as well. And this is another maybe useful tip and relatively unknown for some, perhaps, is that we can use PowerPoint to design graphics. So many of you will be very comfortable with Microsoft PowerPoint already. It's a tool that we have available to all of us. Students have access to it as well. And what we can do within PowerPoint is we can live within the environment that we do our presentations, our slide decks, and how we share our slides. And we can actually export visual elements out of that into, say, our Canvas courses or into any other visual artifacts that we give to our students. So, other visual things that we might export, for example, could be things like infographics. You could be exporting content for a brief, an assessment brief, or a handout. And so what you can do with PowerPoint, and I'll show you in a second, is you can export any of that content out as PNG and you can use it in your Canvas course or you can use it in other kind of documents and things that you share with your students. So examples are module banners, icons and buttons. So there are icons and buttons within PowerPoint that you can actually export and use for things like you know, we talked about visual consistency across a course. You could use icons for readings, videos, assignments, important elements within your design, and you could then insert them into your Canvas pages. You can also export smart art and icons from PowerPoint and use it in Canvas instead of plain text. And you can also just export slide to pages. So you can use, you know, a lecture intro slide as a graphic to become a header image within your Canvas module. So PowerPoint is actually quite a powerful tool within the tool set that doesn't cost us any extra money or licensing or anything like that, and that we can use to create graphics and elements for our designs. If you just bear with me, I'm going to just break out of this a second and go into our PowerPoint application just to show you this in action. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my desktop and I'm going to go into PowerPoint. So here's an example of a page that or a slide that actually has an icon graphic on it. This was pulled in from another icon source or a set of icons that we use for Tell designs. Um, and I'll show this as well in a second with the pre made or available icons and assets within PowerPoint. So I'm just going to show you this one, for example. So one thing that we could do here is if we wanted to use this graphic in our design, we can right click and we can save as picture. And what we can do that with that then is we can actually give it a meaningful name. So this particular graphic we're going to say has to do with learning uh, artifacts. And I'm going to save that. Now it defaults as PNG. So we can save that as PNG. And then I can go into my, it's going to stop sharing here and bring up my module. So this is a Canvas module. And again, just going back to just some of the principles we were talking in our design, we can see some of that in action here in this sample module that I've created for designing engaging visuals. So we can look at some of the elements, including the white space within the content, the relative size of objects. So if I go into edit this home page here, there are a few just things to note. So heading 2, because heading 1 is reserved by Canvas, These other elements are heading threes, so this gives kind of relative hierarchical elements to our design. But also one of the things you can do within Canvas pages is you can change the size of the main body font because the standard one is 12 points, and 14 points is a bit more readable. So if that's one thing you want to do within your Canvas pages, is quite easy to do, obviously, through the rich content editor by changing it here. And because we've used a table, this is a table within Canvas. Um, each table has properties within when it's within its design to be able to change relative spacing, so cell spacing and padding. So all of these things allow for that kind of breathing space within your module layout or in your page layout. These are just icons that I've pulled in, and I'll show you a few icon library examples in a second. So these all kind of relate to the content within the page. But what I've done is I've chosen the decorative image option here because they're icons, they're decorative images. They don't really need to be explained to screen readers. And again, that's that alt text principle in action there. So if you're bringing in images, just be cognizant really of their meaning within the design, if you can. And so this is just an example of a homepage design with some simple icons that help in terms of parsing the information. So this is a kind of a module homepage with learning objectives, the syllabus, and you're basically linking then into the relevant elements within your Canvas module. So I'm just going to save that a second. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to an existing page that I have. So let's talk about um, one of these here. Okay, so this is, let's go back to self, yeah, it's self on, I would say it's self-directed here. So if I go to edit this page, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my image from PowerPoint into this design. So one of the first things we can do is we can actually use t tables, and tables are perfectly fine to use for layout as long as you just add certain things to them. And if you run a UDoIT accessibility checker, it'll tell you if you've not added the correct alt tags or headers to your content. So what you can do is you can go to Insert Table. We're just going to add a two column layout for here. What you can do is you can paste in this content into the relevant cell. And on the right hand side, we're going to put in an image that we just pulled out of PowerPoint. So I'm going to go to Image, Upload Image, and then I can go to my object. I'm going to say this is a decorative image. I'm going to embed the image and we can bring that in there. The other thing we can do with our table is we can just remove the border, so it's just not showing up as a border. We have to show the caption because that's one of the things screen readers uh, rely on. So I'm just going to put instructions, and we can just save that out. So now we can do other things to this design, but it's just to show you, I suppose in theory here, really, you can bring in any elements from your PowerPoint slides, and you can reuse them within your Canvas layout. So another way of looking at that would be to go back to our PowerPoint slide deck, and we're going to look at the kind of the application of color to icons and how we can also use these within our design. So within our options in in PowerPoint, we have the ability to bring in certain things. So we can bring in screenshots. So if you wanted to take screenshots and to style them within PowerPoint, you could do that. When I talk about styling screenshots, you might want to give them a border or some padding, or even to add some sort of labeling to them if they were needed in terms of a diagram or something like that. But within PowerPoint, you have a lot of kind of stock options available to you, and one of those is icons. And op icons opens up the following. So you have images and you can have icons. And so you can look at maybe look for the relevant icon. So I'm just going to bring in something generic in here and insert it. I can make that bigger. Now, what I can do is, in order to have maybe better control over this, we can go to Format Graphic on the right. So this at the moment is an icon, but what we can do is we can convert it to a shape. And so converting it to a shape just gives us a bit more control in terms of adding gradients or fills or to be able to style it up. So one thing we could do is we could say, right, I want to use this icon and I want to give it a color that matches in with an element of the MTU color palette. So you can go down to your colors in here and you can go to more colors. And what you can do is you can hit the sampler and you can go like this. Or if you wanted to as well, you could go in and you can add the relevant hex values. So there's various options in here in terms of how you add color, and there's preset colors in there. But why this is useful, I suppose there's a lot, as I said a while ago, looking at PowerPoint, it can be quite useful as an image editing tool. Not that it's meant to be an image editing tool out of the box, but I suppose a lot makes a lot of sense for us to be doing our design work in something that we're also designing everyday slides, and we can reuse that content within the learning content in our Canvas module as well. Other simple things you could do is you could do a gradient fill. So you could change these colors to map over to a gradient. Now there's preset gradients in there that you can use, and you can vary the direction of them and so on. And gradients are a nice subtle way, as long as you don't maybe something like that wouldn't work obviously, but you could use just kind of linear gradients that work better and are a bit more contrasty, and they just work well in some designs. So if we wanted to, we just maybe look at customizing this a bit better. Yeah, we just go back to one of these. Okay, that looks okay. And what we can do if we want to map these colors over the gradient colors, we can go back to sampling the colors from the corporate guidelines as well. So again, like the previous step, what we can do, just maybe size it up a bit so it's going to match the design a bit better. And because these icons are all part of PowerPoint, they don't degrade in quality when you resize them. Another thing you can do is you can hit Shift on your keyboard to make sure that they don't squash up like this. That just helps you to kind of unify the scaling properties of the graphic. So again, like our previous one, you can go save as picture. You can save it out as a PNG, and then you can go back to your content in here. Now, not that this particular graphic has any particular relevance in here to the content, but I'm just gonna maybe swap this out for that one just to show you. Image, upload image, um, and again, something like that. Now, in certain cases where your image is quite big, because we exported from the slide there, you can obviously downsize that by using the percentage in here and going done, and that'll work in there. And you can play around then with your alignment of the particular icon. within the table as well. And obviously, um, table properties like spacing and padding and things like that. Okay, so that's just a very quick look at how you might do something like that within PowerPoint. Um, I'm just going to maybe point you to some resources that you can use. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to go into slide share mode here. I'm just going to do it within the with the PowerPoint interface here, so we don't break out of share again. So some resources that you might use. So mention some of the MTU examples. Canto, and I'm going to paste these into the chat. Canto is the MTU kind of stock photography resource. So if you need to pull in photographs of buildings or of people and other elements within MTU, they're all available in that. You have to register initially with your MTU credentials, but there is no issue in accessing that. The logo variations are available. Most of you have probably seen those already. They're available on the marketing site, and also there's some PowerPoint templates from the marketing unit as well at their on their site. Um, what you can do is you can use those as a sort of a basis for building up a visual theme. So if you look at some of the examples that we used in terms of maybe using icon sets, sampling colors from the MTU guidelines, and using consistent typefaces within the templates, you can build yourself up quite a nice theme document that you can then export various images out for the likes of Canvas and for the likes of other artifacts that you might be using. So these are then some stock resources you can use. So Pixabay is quite a good one. This has a lot of completely open source, free to use photos, vector graphics, and videos. So if you reach a limit in maybe what you're able to get from the stock icons within PowerPoint, that's quite a good resource to work with. And you also have photos and videos that you can pull in there as well. There are others. So you have the Noun project as well. This is another kind of a stock icon library that you can use. You can use that if you're using it free. You have to attribute your content. So you basically just have to acknowledge that content in your course. So it's okay if you're putting icons like that to attribute in a page at the end of your module, for example, just so that you're crediting the original creator of the icon. And there are lots of others. There's another one called Flat Icon as well. I'll just type in the name into the chat. That gives you a really nice library of various icon styles that you can use within your design. So icons can take you quite a good way through your design of Canvas pages and of slides, but also there's quite a lot of others. And if you link up that kind of concept of bringing in icons and editing them and styling them within your PowerPoint application as the design application, you don't need a Photoshop or any other kind of tool to do that. You can do that in PowerPoint. Just in terms of looking at those, then some tips. CC0 is no attribution required. CCBY means attribution. So if you're taking content from stock sources, just make sure you understand the attribution required. But as long as you attribute your content, there's no issue there. In looking at all of the content, I've mentioned accessibility, so do add alt text when inserting your images, not only in Canvas but in your slides as well, because you're going to be exporting your slides probably for your students afterwards. And just consistency is key. So blend your images that you source or you create with MTU branding for a professional look. So I hope all of that was of use to you folks. That's it for this session. But if you do have any questions, I'll just have a look up at the Q&A, just make sure there's nothing that I haven't answered yet. Hopefully, you get something from this anyway. I'll send you on the slides and the recording shortly after the event today. But I'll leave it open for maybe a minute or two there for questions if you have any.